The heavy scent of my father's expensive cologne filled the formal living room, mixing with the nervous silence. Everyone was here, my stepmother, Helen, my half-brother, Mark, and my half-sister, Amanda. We were waiting for the estate attorney, Mr. Sterling. A recent health scare had pushed my father to finally discuss his will. I moved toward an empty chair at the large dining table, my heart thudding. As my fingers brushed the leather, my father's voice cut through the quiet, cold and sharp. "Katherine," he said, loud enough for all to hear. "Don't act like you're part of the family today. Just stay out of the way." The room froze. Helen tried to hide a smirk. My siblings looked at their hands. I felt my face burn with a humiliation so deep it stole my breath. Just then, Mr. Sterling cleared his throat. "Actually," Mr. Sterling said, his gaze steady on me, "I need Miss Hayes in a separate room. Alone, please." The silence shattered into confused whispers. My father's face was a mask of stunned irritation. Without a word, I followed the attorney, my legs shaky. He led me into my father's private study, a room I was rarely allowed in, and closed the door with a soft click. The noise from the living room vanished. He didn't sit behind the large oak desk. Instead, he stood before me, his expression unreadable. He opened his briefcase and pulled out a simple, cream-colored envelope. It was sealed with dark red wax, and I recognized the elegant, looping handwriting immediately. It was my grandmother's. "She asked me to give this to you," he said softly. "Before anything else is read to the family." My hands trembled as I broke the familiar wax seal. The paper inside was the same scented stationery my grandmother always used. "My dearest Katherine," it began. "You are the only one in this family I trust. There is something you must hear before anyone else knows a single thing." I looked up at Mr. Sterling, my eyes wide with questions. He gave a slow, grave nod and took out his phone. "She recorded this for you, just a week before she passed." He pressed the screen. A moment of static, then her voice, warm and firm despite the crackle, filled the quiet study. "Katherine, my darling. I know how they treat you. I saw it for years. Helen has been manipulating your father, siphoning money for her own children." My breath hitched. "Everything I truly worked for," her voice continued, strong and clear, "is legally tied to you now. Protect it." I walked back into the living room feeling like a different person. The letter was folded safely in my pocket, my grandmother's voice echoing in my mind. Every head turned toward me. The air was thick with suspicion. My father's eyes were narrowed, Helen's were blazing with curiosity, and my siblings looked at me like I was a thief who had just stolen their future. I tried to take my previous seat in the corner, but Helen was on me in an instant. She cornered me by the bookcase, her voice a low, venomous hiss. "What did he tell you in there? What did that man say?" I pressed my lips together, refusing to answer. My silence was a weapon I had never used before, and it infuriated her. "Mark, never one for subtlety," muttered loud enough for me to hear, "that attorney came here for one reason. The money." Helen's composure finally snapped. "What is this, Katherine?" she demanded, her voice rising. "Some pathetic attempt to manipulate a dying woman's wishes? To turn her against us with some sob story?" She gestured around the room, rallying her audience. "We all know you've always felt like an outsider. But to scheme like this?" I stood perfectly still, my hands clenched at my sides. I would not give her the satisfaction of seeing me cry or yell. I just looked at her, my expression blank. My father finally stood, his face dark with anger and embarrassment. He pointed a finger at me, his hand shaking slightly. "You will tell us what is going on right now, young lady," he boomed. "Or you will leave this house." For my entire life, I had bent to his will. I had accepted the smaller room, the less expensive gifts, the dismissive comments. But hearing my grandmother's voice, knowing she had seen the truth, had lit a fire inside me. I looked my father directly in the eyes. "No," I said. The word was quiet, but it echoed in the stunned room. His face went pale with shock, then red with rage. "Get out," he snarled, his voice low and dangerous. "Get out of my house." I didn't argue. I turned, picked up my purse, and walked out the front door. My entire body was shaking, but my resolve was solid. As I slid into the driver's seat of my car, my phone buzzed. It was Mr. Sterling. "Katherine," he said, his voice urgent. "Don't go home. You need to hear the rest. You're not safe with them right now." I met him at his office 20 minutes later. The calm, professional space was a world away from the toxic atmosphere of my father's house. Mr. Sterling gestured for me to sit. "Your grandmother was very specific," he began, opening a large file on his desk. "She didn't just leave you an inheritance, Katherine. She named you the sole executor and primary beneficiary of the Hayes Family Trust." The name meant nothing to me. He saw my confusion. "It's a separate entity from your father's estate. He has no control over it. It holds the majority of the family's true wealth, the real estate, the stock portfolio, everything." He slid a document toward me. "And this is a signed affidavit from your grandmother, detailing Helen's financial misconduct. She's been moving money for years." My head spun. "They've been living," he said quietly, "off accounts they had no right to touch." The truth didn't feel like a victory. It felt like a demolition. All those years I thought I wasn't good enough, that I was the problem, the difficult one. I had built my life around that story. Now, it was crumbling. The real story was so much uglier. I wasn't the black sheep, I was the target. A single, hot tear escaped and traced a path down my cheek. I wasn't crying for the money. I was crying for the little girl who had believed she was unlovable. Mr. Sterling watched me with quiet sympathy. When my tears subsided, he reached into his file once more. He slid another, smaller envelope across the polished wood. "This one," he said, his voice heavy, "is for your father. To be read only by him. And I believe it will destroy his marriage." I held the envelope addressed to my father. It felt heavy with consequences. A part of me wanted to throw it in a drawer and never think of this family again. To take my grandmother's legacy and build a new, clean life far away from them. But then I remembered the smirk on Helen's face. The cold dismissal in my father's voice. The years of being made small. Walking away would be peace, but it wouldn't be justice. My grandmother had entrusted me with this for a reason. She believed I was strong enough. I looked at Mr. Sterling, my decision made. "We do this properly," I said, my voice firmer than I expected. "Through the correct legal channels." He gave a slow, approving nod. "They will not make it easy, Katherine. They will try to fight you every step of the way." The fight began almost immediately. My phone buzzed later that evening with a text from Helen. "Katherine, we are all so confused and hurt. We just want clarity. Can you please explain what documents the attorney showed you? We are family, after all." The fake sweetness of the message made me nauseous. Then, a text from Amanda, "You're tearing this family apart. How can you be so selfish?" Mark was blunter, "You won't get away with this." I didn't reply to any of them. Their words were weapons, and I was no longer an easy target. 2 days later, the official letter arrived. It was from my father's personal lawyer, a formal request to remove me from any and all future estate discussions, citing my disruptive and secretive behavior. Their attacks were like waves crashing against a newly built seawall. I didn't react. Instead, I prepared. I met with Mr. Sterling almost daily, learning the intricacies of the trust. I gathered my own financial records. And I did something I should have done long ago. I drove to my grandmother's old cottage, which had been sitting empty. Using the key she'd given me years before, I let myself in. In her bedroom closet, tucked inside a hatbox, I found her journals. I spent the afternoon reading her elegant script, her words confirming everything, her distrust of Helen, her disappointment in my father, her fierce love for me. I was surrounded by the ghost of her support when my phone rang. It was Mr. Sterling. "They've called for an emergency estate meeting," he said. "Tomorrow. And you are legally required to attend." Walking into the conference room at my father's lawyer's office felt like stepping into a lion's den. My father, Helen, Mark, and Amanda were already seated on one side of the long table, a united front of hostility. Their lawyer, a stern-looking woman, sat at the head. I sat alone on the other side. My father didn't wait for a greeting. "We're here to formalize my wishes," he announced, his voice cold. "Given recent events, I am cutting Katherine from everything. She will receive a single, token amount. Nothing more." He looked at me, expecting to see shattering pain. He saw only calm stillness. Mr. Sterling, who had been quietly observing, stood up. He adjusted his tie and looked my father directly in the eye. "Actually, sir," he said, his voice calm but firm. "That's not possible." The room went utterly silent. My father blinked. "What did you say?" Mr. Sterling opened his briefcase. "I said, it is not possible for you to disinherit Katherine from the assets in question. Over 20 years ago, your mother, Eleanor Hayes, established the Hayes Family Trust. She appointed Katherine as the sole executor and primary beneficiary upon her passing." He placed the bound trust document on the table. "This trust holds the majority of the family's assets, the vacation property, the stock portfolio, the art collection. You, Mr. Hayes, are merely a lifetime beneficiary of a small portion of the income. You have no power to change its terms." For a moment, there was only stunned silence. Then the room erupted. Helen was the first to find her voice, half rising from her chair. "This is a mistake. A trick." Mr. Sterling was prepared. He didn't raise his voice. He simply laid out the evidence, piece by devastating piece. The original, notarized trust document, signed by my grandmother. Her accompanying letter of wishes. Bank statements showing the flow of assets into the trust years ago. Finally, he played a short segment of the audio recording, my grandmother's voice filling the sterile room, clear and decisive. "My son has been blinded by his wife. I cannot risk everything I built being dismantled by her greed." As her words played, I watched the color drain from Helen's face. She knew. She knew her secret access to that money was over. Mark and Amanda looked from their mother to their father, their expressions shifting from anger to dawning panic. My father stared at the speaker, his face a pale, confused mask. When the recording ended, he turned his shattered gaze to me. "Katherine," he whispered, his voice broken. Did you plan this?" That question, filled with such profound misunderstanding, broke the last of my silence. I stood up, my hands flat on the cool table. For the first time, I spoke not as a daughter begging for scraps, but as a woman stating a fact. "I didn't plan anything, Dad. You did. When you let them treat me like a guest in my own home. You planned it every time you let her buy Mark a new car while I worked 2 jobs to pay my tuition. You planned it when you told me not to act like part of the family in front of a stranger." My voice was steady, but tears welled in my eyes. "Grandma saw what you refused to. She saw the truth. All I did was survive it." The room was utterly still. My father looked down at his hands, unable to meet my gaze. Mr. Sterling let the silence hang for a moment before speaking. "We're not done," he said. Mr. Sterling turned his attention to Helen. "Mrs. Hayes, the trust documents also reference a separate matter. Your unauthorized withdrawals from Mrs. Eleanor Hayes's personal accounts over the past 7 years." He slid a spreadsheet across the table. It listed dozens of transactions, large sums of money transferred into accounts held only by Helen. "This constitutes fraud. Katherine, as the executor, has the right to press criminal charges." A sharp, collective gasp went around the table. Helen's face was a sheet of white paper. Her eyes, wide with terror, locked onto mine. This was the moment they all expected me to strike. To demand revenge. I looked at Helen, at the sheer panic in her eyes, and I made my choice. I took a deep breath. I am not going to press charges, I said clearly. I only demand that the estate, and this trust, be handled correctly from this moment forward. My words hung in the air, so unexpected they seemed to confuse everyone. Helen stared at me, her mouth slightly agape. My siblings looked shocked. This wasn't how the script was supposed to go. The powerless, dismissed daughter was supposed to be vengeful and greedy. My refusal to destroy them was a power they didn't understand. It was a power built on fairness, not fear. I wasn't giving them mercy, I was giving them a standard of behavior I intended to uphold. The dynamic in the room had completely shifted. I was no longer the victim pleading my case. I was the one in control, choosing the higher ground. My father, who had been staring blankly at the wall, slowly turned his head toward me. His voice was a ragged whisper, filled with a confusion I had never heard from him before. Why? He asked. Why aren't you fighting back? I looked at my father, truly looked at him, and saw not a monster, but a weak, manipulated man. The anger I had carried for so long began to dissolve, leaving behind a sad, clean emptiness. I've spent my whole life fighting for a place at a table where I was never welcome, I said, my voice soft but clear. I fought for your attention, for your approval, for just a little bit of your love. I'm tired, Dad. I don't need to fight for it anymore. I don't need to fight you anymore. The truth of my words settled over the room. It wasn't an accusation, it was a statement of fact. I was free, and he was still trapped. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He slumped in his chair, his shoulders caving inward. When he finally spoke, his voice was broken, small. Is it too late? He asked, not looking at anyone. To fix things? Mr. Sterling, sensing the emotional shift, formally presented me with a thick, blue folder. This contains all the documents, account numbers, and legal authorities pertaining to the Hayes Family Trust. As of this moment, you are the acting executor. The weight of it was both terrifying and empowering. I was now legally in charge of the very fortune they had all assumed was theirs. The focus immediately shifted from emotional drama to cold, hard reality. Mark leaned forward, his earlier hostility replaced by a frantic worry. What about the lake house? We were supposed to get that. Amanda chimed in, her voice pleading. My tuition for grad school. Dad promised. They were panicking, realizing their financial safety net was now held by the person they had treated the worst. I let them talk, waiting for them to finish. When the room was quiet again, I spoke. I've made a decision about how this will work. I looked at each of them, my panicked siblings, my pale stepmother, my broken father. I am not going to cut anyone off out of spite. That would make me no better than what I've endured. I saw the shock register on their faces. They had expected punishment. The trust will be restructured, I continued. It will be managed transparently. There will be clear allowances for education and health, for all of you. The core of the capital, the legacy my grandmother built, will be protected. It will be fair. It will be legal. My calm, ethical approach terrified them more than any screaming fit ever could. They couldn't fight fairness. They couldn't manipulate transparency. Helen shot up from her chair scraping loudly against the floor. This is outrageous. You can't do this, she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at me. I'll lawyer up. You haven't heard the last of this. The next day, I expected a declaration of war. Instead, I received a polite email from a lawyer I did not recognize. He introduced himself as representing Helen. My stomach tightened, bracing for a long legal battle. But the email wasn't a threat. It was a request. It asked for a private meeting to discuss a quiet and amicable settlement regarding the past financial misunderstandings. Helen wasn't fighting. She was surrendering. Her own lawyer had likely seen the evidence of her misconduct and told her she would lose, spectacularly and publicly. She was cornered, not by my aggression, but by her own past actions and my refusal to be like her. As I finished reading the email, my personal phone buzzed. It was my father. His text was simple: "Can we talk? Just us. Please." We met at a small, quiet diner far from his usual expensive haunts. He was already in a booth when I arrived, looking older and smaller than I had ever seen him. He nursed a cup of black coffee. "Thank you for coming," he said, his voice rough. He didn't meet my eyes at first. Then, he began to talk. He admitted everything. How Helen had slowly isolated him from me. How she had convinced him that spoiling her children was the way to keep his new family happy. How he felt ashamed for knowing, deep down, that it was wrong, but was too weak to stop it. "I was a coward, Katherine," he said, finally looking at me, his eyes glistening. "I failed you. I am so sorry." It was the apology I had waited my whole life to hear. He then reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, worn envelope, stained and soft with age. "This is for you," he said, sliding it across the Formica table. With trembling fingers, I opened the old envelope. Inside wasn't a letter. It was a child's drawing, faded and creased from years of being folded and refolded. I recognized my own clumsy childhood hand. It was a picture of a tall, stick-figure man holding the hand of a little girl with yellow crayon hair. Underneath, in my wobbly printing, it read, "Me and Daddy." I remembered making it for him one Father's Day, a lifetime ago. I had thought he'd thrown it away. My vision blurred with hot tears. He had kept it. All these years, through all the distance and coldness, he had carried this little piece of me in his wallet. The last of the icy wall around my heart shattered. I didn't say anything. I just cried, and for the first time in decades, he reached across the table and placed his hand over mine. As we sat in that quiet understanding, my phone buzzed. It was Mr. Sterling. "The final documents are ready for your signature," he said. "Whenever you're ready." A week later, I walked into Mr. Sterling's office for the final time. My family was there, but the atmosphere was different. The anger was gone, replaced by a tense, weary acceptance. My father gave me a small, tentative nod. Helen wouldn't look at me. Mark and Amanda just watched, silently. The papers were laid out on the desk. Mr. Sterling pointed to the flagged lines. With a hand that did not shake, I picked up the pen. I signed my name again and again, formally securing my grandmother's legacy and enacting the transparent, fair management plan I had created. I was no longer the girl begging for a seat at the table. I was the woman who owned the table. As I put the pen down, I felt a profound sense of peace. The power was now firmly, and rightly, mine. As we all stood to leave, Helen slowly approached me. She stood before me, her head slightly bowed. The fight was completely gone from her. "Katherine," she began, her voice trembling. "I know I have no right to ask, but please. When you restructure everything, please consider the family's needs. Your brother and sister, they're scared." I looked at her, this woman who had caused me so much pain. I felt no hatred, only a deep and solid pity. I replied, my voice soft but unyielding. "For years, Helen, you made sure I had no needs that you considered important. I won't do that to you, or to them. But I will also never, ever, let you take advantage again." I turned and walked out of the office. I got into my car, the bright afternoon sun warming my face through the windshield. On the passenger seat lay the first letter from my grandmother, the one that had started it all. I hadn't won by destroying them. I had won by becoming everything they said I couldn't be: strong, fair, and finally, completely whole.